Prepare to be swept away by a new musical that's testing its sea legs right now in the nation's capital. Thanks so much for joining us and Happy New Year. I'm Tamsin Fidel. The new musical Swept Away is inspired by the songs of the Avett Brothers, and it's on stage right now at Arena Stage in Washington, D.C. Let's send it out to Paul Wontorek.
That's right, Tamsin. This compelling new musical about a real-life shipwreck is playing right here at Arena Stage. I sat down with the cast and creative team to find out more. Just gut reactions. You just sat through the show again. What is it like for you? I mean, it's different for you watching it than for me.
It's so humbling to see this many people gathering around these songs that were made without this intention. You know, there was no aspiration. It was made from a place of blind love, and then to see all these people working so hard around these songs and around this story and building the story around these songs, it's very humbling. I
realized 20 years, actually, the anniversary is coming up of this album that inspired this musical. Can you remember sort of like what about this story resonated?
I mean, absolutely. Seth and I come from a long line of adventure stories, at sea, disaster stories. Our father, he passed down a love for this type of nonfiction.
He imprinted a bit of horror and a bit of I think for him it comes from a place of interest in heroism and survival.
Yep.
So he has passed on a lot of war stories and a lot of, lost at sea stories, shark stories, all these like just horrendous experiences for people that came through them.
But there was a book called The Custom of the Sea, and it was the story. And for us, we were driving around to places that seemed unknown in a van. We seemed to have nothing but this belief that we were doing something that was true, like young people do, to go and be as true as they can, and they mean that, and that's a good thing. But we were in that, living it, and it was easy to see that van as our vessel. And while we were making records in that time, that record in particular, it was easy just to see that concept as a part of our story.
We took ourselves quite seriously, I think that it all just seems so pressing and like just such a great living analogy. Like we were in our little lifeboat, separated, like we were seeing our peers succeed, and we were seeing ourselves sort of extricating ourselves from the common template, and the common sort of tunnel of experience. And it was scary, and we felt very driven to survive.
Well, you send my life a whirling, darling, when you're twirling on the floor.
I feel like you maybe like secreted, if that's still a term, this show because you're a super fan of the Avett Brothers. You said backstage at American Idiot, you literally had their posters. You were attracted to their music, and did you ever imagine that you would now be in a position like this? I mean,
No.
did you see a theater piece out of it, or?
Never. They write this really potent, high-stakes music. Like, I knew that thematically it was super duper rich, but I had never thought, oh, somebody really needs to make a musical out of those songs. It just hadn't quite crossed my mind. It's very surreal because I just have so much respect and admiration for them as artists, and I don't take it for granted. When I walk out on stage every night, it's a privilege to get to live inside their songs for a night and to sing these songs and to expand on the themes that they've put into their lyrics. It's something I absolutely treasure.
Forever I will move like the world that turns beneath me, and when I lose my direction, I'll look up to the sky. When the black dress drags upon the ground, I'll be ready to surrender and remember we're all in this together.
Stark, is it safe to assume you didn't go into this knowing much about this famous thing that happened at sea in 1884, which is the jump off
True.
for this show?
My exposure was to the Avett Brothers was through John, that poster in his dressing room. I saw the poster and I said, well, who's that? And he said, oh, let me show you. And he put it on the record and we listened to it and I was like, oh, this is cool. And he got me into the band. That was in 2010.
Yeah.
And then I heard about the musical when it was in its development, early development. And then I was invited to join one of the workshops in 2019, and then I've been on board ever since. But I did go and read all the books about shipwrecks and survival and stuff so that I can place myself in that world.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of them.
It is 4 guys who are stuck in a boat together.
Right.
That's a very tense setup,
Yeah.
very theatrical setup. Was that immediately exciting to you? Is that sort of the tension of that?
It was intriguing and daunting because, look, you know, like Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat is one of my favorites, but a lot of people fall to that movie because it is so theatrical, because the conceit of being trapped on a boat, how do you do that? And figuring that out, I knew was going to be a challenge, and one that I ended up really taking on and having a great time with the design team to figure out how to do it. It's like a musical as a Nathaniel Hawthorne or Herman Melville short story. Inside this very tightly constructed 90-minute musical are 2 distinct acts with a prelude and a coda. So it's quite complicated, but there was a before and after. And so figuring out how to negotiate and create the before and the after of it was really, really fun.
So what was your reaction when you first got your hands on this script and these roles? I mean, this is a very unusual story for a musical.
When I first read the script, my jaw was on the floor by the end when I was like, it went there. Holy crow. You like, I can't, it's not what you're expecting. I'm not.
Good.
I'm just saying
You gotta watch
it takes
each other.
It takes big swings.
Yeah. Oh, it does.
It goes in
And it
unexpected
covers
directions.
so much. It's forgiveness and redemption and choices we make, and you know, it's just beautiful. And it's all done without intermission in 90 minutes. You know, and it's amazing.
So we're in 1888.
Yes, sir.
What is it like playing guys of that time and finding these characters?
In 1888, it's just this men and burly, and you get to just grow the beards out, and it's very gruff, and it's a hard existence because we did a lot of research on the whaling world, and these guys were out at sea at 6 months at a time, and their wives and kids, they just left them. But you know, you wonder why they did it outside of just the adventure and maybe a place to be structured. It was like the Wild West on a little boat.
Mignonette, that case that the Avett Brothers album was based on, and then was kind of the inspiration and jumping off point for this story,
Right.
was one of the first cases of maritime law. Maritime law until then had just kind of been, you know, what you need to do at sea, you do. And if it's heinous, you don't talk about it. That case of Mignonette was the first time that sailors or people at sea that had done unsavory things were tried in court. So like, we're kind of existing right at the rise of that time.
Yeah.
Nothing short of thankful, nothing gonna change my mind. I'm walking a different highway. No, nothing gonna change my mind. I'm traveling a different highway.
What do you think of musicals?
I'm a big fan of jazz, and when the time I met Scott and Seth, I was studying jazz. Went back to school to study jazz guitar, jazz bass, and those songs all come from the Great American Songbook. I mean, all the jazz songs are show tunes. As far as the Broadway and that world, I know nothing about that world, but the idea of having the songs released from us and given to the world in that way, you know, it's extremely exciting. It feels like, you know, as we move through our lives and, you know, eventually pass on ourselves, the songs perhaps can keep living in different forms, in different places.
Ain't no man can save me. There ain't no man can enslave me. There ain't no man, a man that can change the shape my soul is in.
You have made a lot of brilliant shows, very different kinds of shows.
Yeah.
You currently have Moulin Rouge on Broadway, big hit. You've done many different things.
Yeah.
How did this show come your way, and what was exciting about it for you?
Well, it was the strangest genesis you could imagine, which is in 2017, I got an email out of the blue from a producer named Matthew Maston, who I'd never met before, young producer, and it said essentially, do you know the Avett Brothers album Mignonette, and do you think it could be a musical? That very day, I went out and I listened to the album while I was hiking. Then I put on sort of an Avett Brothers playlist and just sort of tried to get into the DNA of what their music was. And the very next day, I did that thing that your agent says never to do, which is I emailed back and I said, I'm in. But I have one caveat, which is the Avetts have to be willing to open up their entire song catalog. And thankfully they were. And it's a wonderful thing to be inspired by music. We had a little bit of that in Moulin Rouge. There were certain songs that we were very excited about. Right. And we thought, well, how does this belong in the world of Moulin Rouge? And it was the same with Swept Away. There are certain songs that just emerge as saying, that's a character singing. And my history with the Avett Brothers was amazing because they're the most generous collaborators you could ever hope for. So I reached out to them and I said, I'd like to tell you what I'm doing. So I flew to North Carolina. I sat at Scott Avett's breakfast table with Scott and Seth for the first time I'd ever met them, and said, okay, let me tell you the story. And I kind of told the whole, I acted it out. I said, this is where we do this song, this is where this happens. And they could not have been more generous. And then I said, but there's one point in the song where I need a hymn, because it has to function as a hymn here and then a reprise later. So it has to serve dual functions, which is a complicated thing for a musical composer. And they wrote a song called Lord Lay Your Hand, which is a hymn and then is reprised. And it's Stark Sand's sort of first big solo number, and it's absolutely breathtaking.
If you're looking for truth and proof, you'll find it there. Lord, lay your hand there. If you're looking for truth and proof, you'll find it there. If you're looking for truth and proof, you'll find it there.
And they've been nothing but willing to change lyrics, to explore different ways of approaching the songs, different music, different instruments. So if you're an Avett Brothers fan, you're going to hear those songs you love in different ways.
I wonder which brother is better, which one our parents love the most. I sure did get in lots of trouble, they seem to let the other go.
What about hearing these guys, these talented guys on stage singing your music? I know John Gallagher is like a super fan. He had your poster up backstage on Broadway. I mean, you know, you were backstage on Broadway already years ago for John Gallagher. What is it like seeing these performers take on this music and these roles and this story?
Musical theater only exists because it does a certain thing that nothing else does. You know, it's like any art form. It's why the Elizabethan sonnet exists, or why jazz exists, or why, you know, bluegrass exists, or abstract expressionism, or anything. Like it only exists because it had to, because no other thing would express it like it does, you know. So seeing these guys do this, it's this once in a lifetime, once in many lifetimes possibly, opportunity to see this music that you wrote and that you've presented possibly thousands of times turned into an expression that you never thought possible, you know? And these four guys and the entire cast are remarkably equipped to do that.
Make sure my sister knows I loved her. Make sure my mother knows the same. Always remember there was nothing worth sharing like the love that let us share our name.
I'm really excited to be a part of something that is so unique that it's got this really avid fan base for the music. The Avett Brothers fan base is really, really strong and fervent, and just under the radar of like mainstream sort of pop music. And then you have the fan base of musical theater who are going to come see the musicals that they hear are cool. So those musical theater fans are going to be introduced to this Avett Brothers music, and those Avett Brothers fans are going to be introduced to the form of musical theater, and that intersection is really interesting and exciting to me. Yeah. And you can feel it in the room as well.